Hello, hello. How are you?
Oh, I'm very good. How are you?
Very good to see you, Kenji and Scott. And here's my son, Paul,
Very good. Hi,
Paul.
Pasha,
Paul.
Pasha Burmenka. And I'm so excited because in the midst of everything, to be here with you, Pasha, and with Jeannie and with Nikolai is just the gift that I can't even describe. It is an honor to have you, Pasha.
Oh, thank you.
Pasha is, besides that, you are my son. You're also an amazing person, and I could just spend probably the whole day talking about how you special for me and for our family, and not only for us, but for your friends as well. And I know you're a very modest person, so I would not embarrass you. But as mom, I'm very proud of you and Jeannie, and to be here, just so energizing. And I think because our talk time is about coping. Coping is a skill. And this is our 23rd time when we go live. Can you
Oh
believe it? So
my.
in 2 weeks,
Seriously.
we will
Good
celebrate
for you.
25 events like this. And because we have from 120 up to sometimes 280 people watching, I believe that we can only grow. And especially because we have guests. You are a specialist in your area, and I will give you in a minute your time to talk. And then Candy Shihan is a great person who is community known, and she's also very very passionate about helping people, developing community. And Scott is a minister, and he is also has skills his skill set, and he's also moderator. So could you introduce yourself? Because if I
Sure.
introduce yourself, I will go for an hour. Okay.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I have to say that I'm a longtime listener, first time caller.
Good.
I've enjoyed many topics that you and Scott have shared in the previous weeks. And Jeannie, my wife, and I join and watch. And it's always good to see, partly because in the time of COVID, we don't get to see each other face to face very often. We do FaceTime periodically, but it's kind of nice to see your mother on the screen talking about what's going on in her life in this environment that we live in. So it's been a very nice way to connect with you a little bit indirectly and see what you're doing. And to introduce myself, my name is Paul or Pasha Bermanko, and I've been talking to my mom, Lydia, about what kind of coping topics she might want me to cover a little bit. And she asked me, is there some good news related to the pandemic and what's going on that I can share based on where I'm coming from? So to share a little bit about what I do and who I am, I have been working in the field of clinical research for 12 years and on the front of data analysis and statistics. And I'm not a statistician, I'm not a scientist, but I do work with the team that actually produces the results for clinical trials. And those are the summaries, the results that go to the Food and Drug Administration, or that may go to data safety monitoring boards that evaluate the safety of a particular investigational product. And so, and a unique opportunity that I've had in the last 10 months is twofold. The first is I had a little bit of a personal introduction to what happens during pandemics, in that I was in China in January 2020.
Oh yes.
So I'd like to cover that a little bit.
Please, yeah, because it was when we talk about coping, that was hard to cope. When you called that you had fever and you are going to the emergency room. So tell us about that.
So I'll cover that, and then the last part is kind of the bookend, which is what I've seen happening in my field over the last 6 months related to the research of the vaccine and other therapeutics. And I've been lucky. A unique opportunity I've had is I've worked in a team that has been working on one of the vaccines that's in development. So January 2020, I'm in Shanghai, China. It's my third time in the last 2 years, and I've spent about 2 months in China working with a team of statistical programmers, analysts, building up that office. And this particular time, I was really excited because my wife, Jeannie, got to come with me to China and she got to spend some time there with me. So we had a really great time. It's the time leading up to the Chinese New Year, which is an exciting celebration. She goes home, and then about 1.5 days later, I developed a fever and a cough and some pressure and burning in my chest, and didn't know what it was. I was wondering if I just sat in a room that recently had some construction. I thought maybe I was breathing in some construction fumes. And I immediately went to a clinic to try to get assessed. And at that time, the situation in China had just started to really take off in terms of the pandemic. So people were wearing masks for about the day before I got sick. But for 1 to 2 days before I got sick, it was pre-pandemic. Everyone's very casual, crowded in subways, crowded in public restaurants and stores. So the situation changed overnight. And luckily, one of the team members that I work with gave me an N95 mask. And he said, I don't know what's going to happen, but here's this mask just in case. And so then put on my mask, went to a clinic, and Shanghai had just set up these special fever clinics to isolate patients that exhibited respiratory virus symptoms from people that needed any other kind of medical attention. So I had a fun experience of going through a fever clinic in China and not speaking much Chinese at all. I had a lot of help from a nurse who spoke English, and generally a very positive, supported experience in a scary situation. And so at the end of the day, I don't know what kind of upper respiratory virus I had. There were no tests at the time. The diagnostics were just based on my presentation of symptoms. But whatever I had was mild, relatively mild. So I was released.
And you had your swab coming negative.
No, there was no test. So
No test
I
at all.
only got a swab test for rapid influenza. So I was negative for influenza A, negative for influenza B. I had, cough. My temperature was about 101 degrees Fahrenheit. But the conclusion of the doctors in this fever clinic was that my CT scan was clear, my vital signs were good, the fever, the cough, they felt would resolve on their own. So luckily, I wasn't put into any kind of, more permanent hospital situation in China. That would have been a whole different experience.
Yes.
But the situation there, I think one of the things you say, what is the good news? Well, this time I feel China reacted in a very comprehensive way. So regardless of what you may feel or think about how China responded, I did see on the ground a rapid response. And I do also, from my personal connections with my coworkers in China, see that they responded just on the individual level because they all worked and lived through the SARS virus in 2003. So when I was reading the news and I was thinking, I don't know what this is, it's probably fine. My coworkers in Shanghai said, we need to close the office. Everybody needs to wear a mask. This is serious, even if we don't know what it is yet. And that's because they had 17 years previous to that, the SARS experience. So people in China for the last 17 years are in the habit of wearing masks, even when they have a small cough or a small sinus congestion. It's just normalized in China.
And they do not go to work when they have some symptoms, do they?
They're very
Even
good
if,
about calling in
yeah,
sick, taking the time they need to recover. It's just a different cultural norm. In the US, it's very much kind of the macho attitude that I'll just work through whatever's going on with me. But it's also a very different mindset, individualistic versus collectivist, that
Hmm.
we don't consider what's my coughing doing in the air around me and the people that are in the room with me. Whereas in China, the culture, the norms are different and partly informed by their SARS experience. So I think this time around, 17 years later, the country responded in a very different way. And thankfully, SARS 17 years ago was just not as contagious, didn't have the spread. In 2020, SARS-CoV-2, the novel coronavirus, much more contagious, but in that country, at least, they were able to mitigate many risks early on. Unfortunately, of course, we see what happened everywhere else.
Hmm.
And I remember when you told me about your quite horrific experience in the hospital when the nurse took you to the infectious department of the hospital through the backyard, and you had no idea what she's doing. Also, when you entered and you opened the door, you told me what you saw. People in.
Sure. Oh, yeah. Well, it was just a kind of a back area of the hospital was converted to this fever clinic. And so the people in there were already wearing the full protective garb. And of course, I was not expecting that at all because I had gone from hearing about the virus very, very briefly on the news to getting some kind of symptoms to go into the hospital. And all of a sudden, it definitely became very real very quickly that maybe I will be here for a while, or maybe this thing that I have is the thing that everybody's concerned about right now. And I got very fortunate that I may not have had it, or if I did, it was a mild version, but also very fortunate just to be going through this in the year 2020. I think that's something that we don't do enough reflecting about when we think about what we're all living through right now. And the reality is, I think, if this happened 10 years ago, 15 years ago, or 20 years ago, the impact would have been much more severe on the entire planet than what it is today. Not to minimize at all what people are going through now, but just the reality that we have cell phones, we have basically a doctor on call in our pocket at any moment.
True.
We can reach out to mothers and wives across continents to tell them what's going on with us. So it's a very different situation now, and I think that is good news, despite the fact that it's a very serious problem.
You did mention that Ginny was right there, right, a week before you got sick. And did you worry, especially since she was pregnant, going back? Because, what if she contracted virus there and then on the way home? So here you're worried about yourself. How did you cope?
So that part, I think the situation was happening so fast. It took me time to even consider the timing. So I was sick on a Tuesday. I traveled home on a Wednesday, and I wore that N95 for 36 hours the entire way home, worried about, am I contagious or are other people contagious around me? And then when I got home, that's when I really began to think through the timing that she was there just 2 days before I got my symptoms. And when I arrived, I did lock myself up. I work from home anyway, and I've been working from home for 10 years. So I have a home office. But when I got home, I locked myself in there and I stayed in there for about 6 days just to rule out any possibility of anything happening. And my father-in-law was living with us at the time, and my wife, who was pregnant.
Yeah.
So I just said, not worth it. I'm just going to live up here for a while.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But luckily, no one else developed any symptoms of anything. Mine were relatively, mild, moderate, and unusual. I've never been sick in the way that I was, but ultimately, I'll probably never know what upper respiratory bug I had. It could have been something totally different.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for this experience because this is very personal and very scary.
Very scary.
Very
For sure.
scary because I remember that night when you called and I was just checking, is it a wait for you to get out and what's happening and reading the news. And I remember you told me, Mom, just don't watch YouTube. Don't Google China. And I decided I won't because it just really, when you cope and you don't know the facts, then it's really becoming, it's just going out of hands.
Yeah.
And so I followed. And I have to tell that I'm learning a lot from my children and from you and Julia a lot. And that's why I think that every word that you have, I know it's based on knowledge. And so today, I think when we talk about anxiety, anxiety is caused by the lack of information, and that creates uncertainty. And since you work in this field, I thought it would be very helpful to hear good news. Where are we finally with the vaccine development?
Sure. So, and I will say I'm not an expert in infectious diseases. I'm not an expert in medicine. It's a funny thing that many people who do what I do get into this job a little bit by accident. So, data analytics is data analytics, whether you're working with economic data, business data, scientific data, or medical data. So I ended up in this pharmaceutical drug development, but it's not because I have any expertise in medicine. However, one of the things that I really need to recognize is just the idea that, again, in 2020, the world's ability to confront this completely new virus is completely exponentially greater than it has been at any time in history. So if you think back on your parents, your grandparents, maybe some of you were children during the polio outbreak in the 1950s in the United States, the amount of information available to people was greatly restricted. You just had maybe 3 stations on TV and Walter Cronkite telling you what the situation is.
Right.
So as people, as individuals, we have just magnitudes more data in front of us. So we can, now if you are concerned about some sniffle that you have, you can even take an online screener just to be put at ease about your own health. Same thing goes for medical professionals. So this virus that was identified in December 2019, its entire genetic code was sequenced in early January 2020.
Wow.
Yeah, that is really amazing. And just the raw computing power to do that would have taken months 10 years ago, and it would have taken years 20 years ago. The sequencing of the human genome, when it was done, you may remember the headlines, but that took months and months of many team members and what at the time were thought to be supercomputers, right? But here, it was probably done on a fancy but relatively average computer, and it was done in days. That's one thing. The other thing is that because that genome was shared globally, it was shared immediately to every genetic or virology or infectious disease institution in the world, that right now, in 9 months after the fact, there are dozens of candidates for vaccines. There are hundreds of candidates for therapeutics. So again, to use the SARS-CoV-1, the virus from 2003, as an example, there were a couple of vaccine candidates in preclinical development, meaning that they had not even been put into any human beings yet. At the time in 2004, when the SARS virus was already winding down. So
Goodness.
that virus was less infectious. Thankfully, fewer people were affected, and we got lucky that very basic contact tracing and isolation reduced the spread of that virus. But if it had not been reduced, and if it had spread at the magnitude that this one has, we would have been waiting for at least a year or more before even a vaccine candidate was ready for preclinical testing, meaning testing in animals, testing in a petri dish. In the 2020 version of the situation, there were already shots being injected into human volunteers in March 2020, 4 months after this virus was even identified. And that is fantastic news for anybody that considers the magnitude of this thing. And certainly it has affected the world, but also we are in a better place than ever to deal with it. And now there are at least 4, maybe 5 candidate vaccines in phase 3, which is the final phase before approval. So while we don't really know the timing, and we don't really know which one of these candidates is going to come out in front to be the first approved vaccine, even so, it does look like end of 2020, early 2021, it's highly possible that something could actually be approved. And then outside of vaccines, there are many therapeutics being developed, some of them already being administered. That's fantastic news for anybody that might be affected by this.
Could I ask a question, Paul?
Yeah, of course, absolutely.
Well, the thing that concerns me, I'm so excited about a vaccine, and all of us want this to be over, and we want that vaccine. But what I'm concerned about, I want to be able to trust it. And I've heard some people say, "Oh, I'll have it before the election," or it sounds like the timing to me doesn't even sound possible. And I don't want to be afraid to get this vaccine once it's offered. And so, how do I know that it's fine, and how do I trust it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And so I can't speak about the particular project that I've been involved in, but I can speak more generally.
Okay.
And this is where I have to say, overall, in 12 years in clinical research, I have never seen any political or business related considerations affect the science of drug development. So certainly things happen during the marketing of drugs or the way that the drugs are actually prescribed in the marketplace. And that can be concerning. But the way that the drug is developed and evaluated for its safety and efficacy, truly, I am a firm believer that the science, the actual statistical validity of the results, all of that is taken extremely seriously. So to summarize very briefly, any average generic development project. So let's say we have a phase 3 drug. This phase 3 drug is going to be administered in almost 100% of cases, and certainly with a vaccine, in a blinded fashion. So a blinded trial means that the doctor is going to go to a special computer system, and they're going to enter the patient's number. Every patient participating in a trial is numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And when they type in patient number 3, the system returns back another number. So it will say, this patient will receive vial number 27. The doctor goes to the cabinet, they get vial number 27, they administer that drug to the patient. And neither the doctor nor the patient know whether vial number 27 is the placebo or the actual drug that's going through testing. So immediately we have a very unbiased experiment going on where I don't know what you've injected in me. So all of my thoughts, preconceptions, emotions about whatever is going to happen with my body, I don't know. And
So they're clean.
exactly, it's
Yeah.
completely blinded. And then the investigator, the doctor, when they evaluate my symptoms, when they take my vital sign, when they ask me questionnaire questions such as, are you feeling any aches and pains? Are you having any gastrointestinal symptoms? They will not affect the way that I answer. They will not bias my answers because they don't know what I've received.
Right. Okay.
And you could probably imagine if a doctor knew that I got a placebo and I said I have a headache, the doctor's going to say, oh, it's fine. Don't worry about it. But
Yeah.
because the doctor knows that there might be equal chance that I got a placebo or I got the investigational product, then the doctor is going to take it seriously in 100% of cases.
Good.
So that's a very important principle. But what many people don't know is that it actually extends through the entire life cycle of the development project. What that means is that my team is at the very, very end stage, meaning that all of the drug has been administered, the patient's vital signs, laboratories, and other assessments have been collected, and then the data has been cleaned. And then finally, at the very end, my team, the analysts, are taking the data and running the summaries. Well, when we run the summaries, when we build our analyses, we are also blinded. So that's something that many people may not know, but in the vast majority of clinical development, even the analysts who will never see a patient in our lives, will never step into the research facility. All we see are numbers on the computer screen, but we do not know what the patient has received when we're doing the analysis.
Okay.
At the very, very end,
Encouraging. That is very encouraging. Thank you.
right, yeah, and at the very, very end, after all the data has been collected, then the computer unblinds the treatments, the analysis gets refreshed one more time. But at that point, the timeline to actually provide the results is so sudden that there's no time for anybody to sit and start poking around and thinking about how to bias the results. So that is a really crucial
That's a good
element.
news.
Yeah,
So
that's how
there's
the
no
research
time for
is done.
politics after that point.
Right. By that point, the numbers have spoken for themselves and the database has been locked, meaning that no data points can be changed after the data has been unblinded.
Okay. Very good. Could I ask you one more question?
Yeah.
Whenever this shot is approved, would you be one of the first in line to get a shot, or would you think you might want to wait a month or two?
That's a good
Yeah, that's a
question.
really good question. So the way that
Uh-huh.
yeah, the way that it's going to be evaluated is that there is a data safety monitoring board that has been organized by Dr. Fauci's group, NIAID. And this board is a group of over a dozen practitioners in virology, in pulmonology, in many, many other fields that are related to the general anatomical presentation of this virus in people. And so they will be evaluating any adverse symptoms or any positive, efficacious response through their lens, right? They're experts. And so they may make some recommendations to either halt a trial that is not considered safe, or they may make a recommendation that it is time to advance to the actual approval stage, at which point the Food and Drug Administration comes in and they will evaluate the data and make a decision again. And that's another set of experts, scientists, doctors, clinicians. So by the time that a vaccine has been evaluated, it will have been tested on more than 20,000 patients for all of the candidates that are in development right now. And most of the 5 or so candidates that are in phase 3 right now are being tested in about 30,000 patients.
Okay.
one of the candidates actually is going to get tested in 60,000 patients. So each company has made kind of their own cutoff point for what they consider the minimum number of patients to collect data on to make a determination. The 30,000 patients is at least 3 times greater than most of the investigational products that I have been involved in the last 12 years.
So what is the kind of usual number?
So a typical phase 3 study may have between 3,000 to 5,000 patients, or it will be a integrated research, meaning that they may have done 4 or 5 different phase 3 studies. And then if they didn't have a large number of patients, maybe one study had 500, another study had 800, the third study had 1,000, they will actually combine all that data and end up somewhere with 3, 4, 5,000 patients. And rarely you might get a study with 10,000, rarely 15. And the fact that all of these vaccine candidates are being tested in 30,000 patients on average, I think that's also another way to have confidence
Good.
in these
Yes,
vaccine
of
candidates.
course.
Yeah.
Yes.
What gives me also confidence, Pasha, that when you talked, and I really appreciate every conversation we had about it, you said that on the third phase, during the third phase, the profile of people who are in the study, not kind of a diversity by age, by gender. Could you say a little more about that?
Absolutely.
Because I think that will give some reassurance that it's not just for like a macho man and then 30 years old, strong basketball, shaped players.
That's absolutely
right?
true.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. So by phase 3, in any clinical development program, the goal is to look at the target population of who would be receiving this treatment in the real world. So in a phase 1 protocol, it might be 18-year-olds who are just trying to get a little extra cash, pay off their car loan or something like that.
Right.
But by phase 3, this would be the target population that the drug is intended to be administered to. So if it's a cardiovascular drug, then you would be enrolling phase 3 patients that have cardiovascular disease. The vaccine candidate really is intended to cover every person in the world. So these large 30,000 patient phase 3 candidates are enrolling people of multiple ethnic and racial backgrounds. And for these phase 3s, there are people over 18, but without, some of them are up to 70, some of them don't have an upper limit on age. Then they will be making sure to stratify people by age, meaning that they want a minimum number of people in a particular age group to have confidence in how the drug performs in that age group. So adults, we should have a lot of knowledge by the time that any candidate gets approved. But even for children, there are pediatric studies that will be conducted in the future. So what that means is that we may have a good idea about the vaccine's performance in healthy adults, as well as adults with some comorbidities like cardiovascular disease, people with obesity, right? People with people with some kind of pulmonology profile that puts them at greater risk. All of that will be known by the time the vaccine might get approved. But I know for at least a few of these vaccine candidates, there are plans for pediatric studies as well. So ultimately, everybody's concerned about children going back to school, children going to summer camp, and these pediatric studies will answer that question before many, many children would get a vaccine. So that's another thing. And so for your question directly, what am I going to do? This is, I think, something that every person does need to consider. And it's just how we consider about getting on an airplane, driving when it's raining, any kind of decision where we're making a cost-benefit analysis.
Mhm.
And so I will tell you mine, but it may not be the same as yours.
Mhm.
So who am I? Well, I work from home. My wife works from home, and I live in a geographic area where it is fairly convenient for me to have my food delivered. Um, I have luckily enough space in my house that I can exercise in my house or
You
outside.
actually dropped the gym
Yeah,
membership.
that's right. We canceled our gym membership, and now we work out at home. So for me personally, even though I am healthy, I don't have any known comorbidities that could make this worse for me, and my wife is healthy. We are going to make the personal choice that we're limiting where we go and how we go about our daily lives. And then when a vaccine candidate does get approved, we will wait a little while to see about what's going on of that safety and efficacy profile in the general population. The reason is just because we can afford to wait a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But I think once we see that in the general population it's performing well, I definitely will get a vaccine. I think that that's very important. For people that are essential workers,
Mhm.
people that are working in an Amazon warehouse, in a hospital, people who are delivering food,
Mhm.
people who work in rehabilitation centers,
Teachers probably, right?
schools. I think that that cost benefit profile is different because my own personal perspective, and it sounds a little bit scary to say it, but it is what I believe, that if you are not taking precautions, I believe that you will get infected with the virus
Mhm.
At some point.
at some point.
Yeah. Yeah.
It could be tomorrow, in 3 years, in 5 years, if this thing is out there circulating in the
Right.
population. It's just, since I work in data analysis, I can say that statistically speaking, you probably will get it.
Right.
But the idea that the vaccine will offer protection for people that are in a high risk category, I think it's just a must, right? I think that if you cannot put food on your table without going into a hospital, that choice I think is very clear that the vaccine is a definite must.
You know, another question I have, just because I'm curious. I know that, just I got a flu shot this year already, just because, I'm following all the rules that I can. But I know that it doesn't protect me from all the flu. Will this shot, the COVID-19 shot, be the same way? Well, you may get it. Is it going to be one of those, you may get COVID-19, but it won't be as severe? Or what kind of protection are these shots going to be offering, do you think?
Sure. So that's a really important consideration. It's a little bit different with the flu because the flu is a slightly different strain every year, and the vaccines that are developed are trying to just target what they think will be the most widely circulating flu. So when you get your flu vaccine, it's targeting this um, flu type of virus that's circulating, and then it's possible what actually gets into the air and circulating amongst people is this flu.
Mm-hmm.
And so it may not protect you as well as if it was the flu that the vaccine was targeting.
Right. Okay.
With COVID-19, at least what I've read, is that it seems like this is not a virus that is mutating quickly.
That was my question.
That's good
Yeah,
news.
that's good
Because
to
a lot
know.
of disinformation was kind of a fear, again, the
Yeah.
fear-based news that it's mutating in absolutely different virus in America than it was in
Right.
Wuhan.
And I don't know about that exactly. I'm not an expert. I have read similar things.
Yeah.
It probably makes sense that there are slightly different strains circulating, but they are just what little I know about infectious disease is that you may have heard about the R naught number. R naught is used to describe basically how many people will get infected from every infected individual, how quickly is the virus spreading. So your typical flu will have a much lower R naught number
Mhm.
than this coronavirus. And genetic mutations take time to happen, so they need to be in a population before they mutate. So a lower R naught, it's more likely you're going to have more mutations. A higher R naught, the virus just spreads too quickly to really mutate.
Oh, that's good.
So that's what little I know.
Another good news.
Yeah, that's what little I know, but it does mean that the candidate vaccines should be targeting the spike protein on this virus, on this coronavirus, and they should develop antibodies that latch to that spike protein and are able to neutralize it.
Is that the replicating viral vector?
Right. So what they know about this coronavirus is that corona means literally it has these spikes, the spike proteins, and spike proteins attached to what's called an ACE2 receptor. The ACE2 receptors are common in our lungs, other places of our body like eyes, nose, throat, but that is why this virus attacks the lungs. So the way that the vaccine is being developed, whether it's the RNA type of vaccine or the viral vector vaccine, the idea is that it's going to latch on and prevent the virus from replicating by covering that spike protein or neutralizing it in some way. So the ultimate vaccines that get approved, different vaccines could have a different rate of efficacy.
Okay.
And the FDA has early on said that they would be likely to approve a vaccine that is shown to be safe and that is shown to have some efficacy rate greater than 50%.
Okay.
So that's what they've said, but of course we don't know what kind of numbers will actually be presented to them when these analyses are provided.
Mm-hmm.
So you could have a vaccine that's 90%, 80%. We just don't know at this time. So it could also either completely prevent infection, or in some cases it could result in a lower infection in somebody.
You know what I'm curious about too, because I know there are several companies working on this, and now you've got me thinking, what if the first one out isn't as good as the next one coming out? You know what I mean?
Right.
What if there are 3 companies that are going to have a vaccine online in the near future? Would there be any way to weigh, well, this one is better than that one, or how would you do that?
Sure. That's probably what I might end up doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because I actually have a fair high degree of confidence that there would be more than one approved
Right.
in early 2021.
Okay.
Which is good for everybody.
Yeah,
Right.
it is good for everybody. And the other countries that are developing their vaccines will know more about their own progress as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
Sure.
I think that by early next year, there will be a lot of information for people to be able to make informed decisions.
Good.
And also the therapeutics, right? So even if you're not able to get a vaccine immediately because of the logistics of producing and distributing them, there are going to be more and more therapeutics available as well. So generally,
Good.
I think all of that is good news. I think that we can have faith in the science and the people working on these programs. The important part, and I frequently think back on my colleagues in China, because they really took an attitude to the whole situation that was cohesive. They acted consistently, and they also maintained that consistent behavior for a long time. So when everything shut down there at the end of January, we closed down the office and they worked from home. Many restaurants, stores, other manufacturing facilities, they shut down. And they shut down until there was a safe number of cases in the geographic area where people were living. So that's something that China did perhaps more effectively than the United States. But the result is that in September and October 2020, everything is open.
Mhm.
The factories, the stores, the offices, public transportation, everything is open there. I think in part because the response from people was to fully buy in and
Right.
in a way that protected other people.
Sure.
So that's something that I think they learned 17 years ago that maybe
Right.
we didn't quite have that lesson, and now we've
Mhm.
had some struggles in the United States.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, when you talked about vaccine that other countries will put on the distribution, since we're from Russia, I've got from my friends from Russia kind of a little cocky message that they said, "Oh, America will be buying our vaccine
Uh,
so that we'll produce it faster." Could you say anything
Good
about
luck.
it? What do you know about that?
Yeah, it's possible, certainly, that another country could develop a better candidate, and we'll find out. But I am personally concerned about the vaccine in Russia
Yeah.
because the phase 3 trial for the Russian version was initiated at the same time as average individuals started to be vaccinated. So Russia basically cut out that phase 3
right.
and they started just injecting people. Now, it's not a great harm, I don't think, because that particular vaccine also showed that it was relatively safe in a smaller number of candidate patients and that it produced an immunological response. So that vaccine probably is on par with these candidate vaccines in the United States. But because I work in clinical research, I personally would like to rely on these phase 3 trials.
Mhm.
And in the United States, the Food and Drug Administration has just published additional guidance for the criteria that will be used for a vaccine candidate within the last 2 weeks.
Huh.
And this is something that may actually delay the approval of the first vaccine, but it is a more strict criteria to make sure that the vaccine is safe and effective. So if the vaccine was injected and the safety profile was good and the antibodies were generated and it got approved, there could still be additional information found once people started to get injected and walking around with this vaccine in their bodies. But the FDA guidance now has said that they want a minimum number of follow up for safety in the trial participants. So they want to make sure that after they get their last injection, and most of the candidate vaccines require 2 shots, that they want a minimum number of follow up for safety in those patients before that vaccine gets submitted for the emergency use authorization.
Mhm.
And secondly, they would like to make sure that there are enough severe cases of COVID 19 in the placebo arm,
Yeah.
meaning that if they had enough data, but they had mostly mild cases, then they wouldn't be able to make an accurate comparison about whether or not the vaccine is preventing the most severe illness. But the latest guidance from the FDA says you have to have a minimum number of severe COVID 19 cases before we will consider your vaccine for an emergency use authorization. So, all of that for me gives me a fair degree of confidence that the scientists are doing their job.
Yeah.
We can trust them, and we just need to be patient.
And that's great news again. Lots of good news about coming vaccine, and as soon as vaccination will begin in a safe way, then of course the number of cases will go down, and so that's the main thing and the hope. But I also wanted to say that with this idea that we are coping, I think I wanted to ask you, Paul,
Mm.
would you recommend certain sources? Because I believe in science, like you do, and people read God knows what. And of course, that causes and produces more anxiety and conversations. And people, it's like people forget that social media actually targets every person,
Right.
a person's
Yeah.
interests, and then targets for him a certain package of information. And so when people argue between each other and the tension goes up, they don't understand that they do not argue about the truth, they argue about their truth.
Right.
So what would you say? What sources will you direct people to during this time that they could read true information, say science based?
Sure. So I think that the journalistic sources that people can refer to are just your general large, very long, tenured journalistic sources. So not something that maybe is a 25-year-old blogger on the internet, but actually journalists that are in the field, have years of experience. So whether it's Washington Post, New York Times, The Economist, uh, PBS, NPR, any of these sources where every time that a fact gets presented, that it has been checked multiple times before going to print. So whether it's Wall Street Journal for the economic numbers, whether it's Business Insider or some of these large organizations, those are certainly, I think, trustworthy. But the additional test you can give it, I think, is are they citing experts?
Good
Mhm.
point. Yeah.
So if you have an infectious disease professor who's speaking about the situation, or Dr. Fauci, or the head of the CDC, or Deborah Birx. These are individuals that are very careful when they make an interpretation, and they will only share information that they have confidence in. But some of these blogs, some of the YouTube channels, Twitter, I think that there are probably incentives for some people to get more inflammatory information out there
Oh, sure.
just so they can sell some ads, get more viewers, but
Yeah.
that Wall Street Journal or New York Times, they're not really in the business of trying to get as many clicks as possible to the same degree as just that 25-year-old blogger, right?
Right.
So that's
I
that's
appreciate that. That gives me a little bit of ammunition. I believe in the free press, of course. My husband was a newspaper man for
Right.
many, many years. But I had someone tell me once, it's just all fake news now. Who can you trust? And my blood started boiling. So it was best for me not to say much, but I just bit my lip. But really, it is check your source. I think that's very good advice. Where are you getting this information? Think about, these people have to have stories verified. They don't make them up. And so I think that's really important. I will use that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
And thank you. And congratulations to Ginny and you with becoming parents. I'm just so
Wonderful.
excited for you.
Yeah, probably the last bit of good news to share.
Congratulations, Ginny.
What happens during a pandemic, right? Is
Yeah.
that there are children being born and families being formed.
And this is good news.
Absolutely.
And
And beards being
Right.
grown.
and thank you, Pasha.
Nice
Thank you. I
beard.
appreciate it so much. Thank you. And so now when Pasha will take his time with the child and with Ginny, I will pass the word to Candy.
But
Thank you.
Thanks,
do you
Mom.
know what I was really thinking about? I was wanting to share maybe just something fun or something kind of lighthearted now, because I think Paul gave us some really good information
Absolutely.
and gave
Yeah.
us some encouragement. I
Yeah.
really do think that's true. One of the thoughts that's not original, but I really like, is worrying about the future keeps you from living fully in the present. And I really thought maybe I would just end with a little party celebration we have, because during these times we do all have things that we're celebrating, but the fact is we can't celebrate them like we want to. We can't throw the big party. I can't hug my grandkids. I can't do the things that I want to do. So I'm going to tell you about a party we had this week that wasn't really anything I would have expected, but it was just okay. It was really good. It was our son's birthday, and he lives a little bit over an hour away. And we almost skipped it, but something called us to know that we just need to do something about this birthday. We can't let it pass. And so we drove to Lee Summit, and we went to our son's house, and our grandchildren were there, and they are 10 and 13. And they were just at home waiting for their dad to get home. We knew that we couldn't go in their house. We knew that we couldn't do things like we planned, but I was able to pack a cooler full of some of our son's favorite food. His favorite salad. I had packed that. I had packed. He loves cream peas and carrots of all things, so I
Oh
made
my.
some of those. I had some threw in some chicken wings. We threw in some dessert, and so that cooler went into the house. We had the boys take that in, and then the oldest grandson put on his mask and got in the car with his grandpa, and they went and got a gift. And my youngest grandson just couldn't understand why I couldn't come in the house and help him decorate. And I said, I just can't do that. And I had my mask on, and I said, but if you want to come outside, we can decorate out here a little bit. So I said, you find anything you can find to decorate. And I'll tell you what he brought me. He brought me one magic marker. He brought me one pair of scissors. He did bring a lot of colored paper. So we had a variety of colored paper. And I asked him to open up the garage door. And in the garage, I walked inside there and I found a roll of paper towels and some tape, just some packing tape. I said, okay, I think we can do it. So this is going to be a party and it's going to be a celebration and we're decorating. So we had 1 hour to decorate. And the thing that I love, check this out. Can you see it? This is something, and Lydia, you may remember, we made snakes one time that looked a lot like this at church when we were celebrating St. Patrick's. And he said, let's make those things and we're going to hang them across the garage door. And we made probably, I'd say, no, 20 or 25 of these in various sizes and colors and hung them across the door. And then the paper towels, we just unrolled the paper towels and we wrote Happy Birthday, Dad, with our one magic marker, because it's all we had. And we stuck it between the two garage doors. And that decoration took us a whole hour to get done. But it was so fun to spend that time with him. And we kept our distance pretty well. And I kept my mask on the whole time. But it was a celebration. And it was a time so well spent. I'm so glad that Mark and I went down to see them, because our son drove in just about the time that Mark and Finley had gotten home with a present and our decorations were up and we got to say happy birthday. And so I think maybe it's important that we find ways to celebrate and we maybe think of different ways we can celebrate, because our old ways of doing things just aren't going to work now. But on the other hand, you don't want to give up just because you can't have what always was. And so that was my kind of thought that I thought I'd share with you, because it was a fun time. What do you say to that?
That story. When I heard about your adventures and how how you traveled and how Mark described himself getting on that journey, and you, that was hilarious. People love that story. So thank you so much for
Sure.
sharing, because nothing can be more precious during this time that than our connection with our families and our grandchildren and children and parents. And it's just heartbreaking. But the good news is that people show and find ways to do it safely.
Right.
And I think now I hear more and more stories such as yours, Candy, that people take precautions like I did
Right.
before coming here to
Yes.
see Ginny, Pasha, and Nikolai. And you take 14 days to stay on quarantine. And I really appreciate you, Scott, that you also followed all the instructions. And then I took the test. And so that's important. And so there are ways, even in the midst of this pandemic, to really see each other only when we follow the guidelines. But and that does not really reduce the fun when you have this time with your grandchildren. That's
Right.
amazing.
It's a different kind of fun, but I think if you enter things with an open mind, and those decorations, they were not perfect. I've seen better decorations in my day, but they were special and they were fun and they served the purpose. And so I was so happy for that.
That's amazing. And but I wanted also briefly, since we are closing,
Mhm.
to see that if we have any questions, so I can see that comments are about even kind of encouragement that Pasha gave us about the research in pediatrics, because children need to be vaccinated. And that's what we will be talking about next week. We will be talking, since Candy started that topic about children. As a teacher, you also know how hard it was, and many of our viewers are teachers or retired teachers. And from this point, it's of course very hard to decide what is best for some families, what is best for others. And so next week I will invite Julia and Curtis Orden to meet with
Ah,
us, and they will be talking about all the good news, all the good things that happened during COVID, in spite of all this fear and the limitations. And of course, children actually, my daughter said, adjusted easily, but not all of them, right? So
Right.
we will hear more. And Curtis, being a very creative man, he will share also about how he, during this time, developed his backyard, since children are home and they need more space for being active, giving them more challenges in the backyard when it was a good weather. And so there are ways that we adults can find. And honestly, this creativity that we show during this time develop us.
Right.
We
I think
become
that's
more creative, and it's
right.
fun. And I,
Yeah.
as a person who really, I'm not a really playful person. I just talked to Ginny about it today. How
Mhm.
hard it is for me to play with children, because my creativity lasts like probably for 7, 8 minutes. And then I'm just like, I need to cook lunch. I need to do laundry. And then the child will say, no,
we
grandma,
just got started.
I want you to take this doll and be that doll. And I thought, oh my, how would I be that doll? I don't know how. And then I get into the role for another 7 or 8 minutes. And it's really, but that's a wonderful opportunity for us to become children again. And also, like you shared, spend the time.
Right.
Spend time with each other.
Time
Remember
is a
how
great gift.
hectic, yes, how hectic life used to be. And now we have more time to think and read. And that's what I think. Maybe you and Scott can share a little. What did you find personally for your own development, own life, the meaning of for what you have now and what you're dealing with? Did you find any niche for yourself during this time before we close? But again, next time, 5 p.m. on Saturday, we will be meeting with parents, and it will be like life of one family during COVID.
Hmm.
And I think it will
Yeah,
be very precious
I
and
think so.
entertaining and also educating. So, can you say a little about yourself during this time before we close?
Scott, how about you? You got
Oh, I was gonna hope that you would go first so I could collect my thoughts.
I will tell you, I've thought about very quickly because I've talked enough. But one of the things that of course, I've been doing a lot of reading and I've read so many books. I need to keep a list of them because they kind of all get a little bit mixed in my mind. But I've read lots and lots of books for pleasure, but I've also tried to read books that are more serious too, just a mix of those. The other thing is I thought was so important is finding a way to maybe inspire someone else, because when you do that you get so much back yourself.
Mm,
And I'm tutoring someone now, and boy was that a blessing. I had so
wow.
much fun doing that. At the end of our first session I could just say that was so much fun, let's do it again next week. And so we'll see how that goes, but I'll give you an update. The other thing that I really spend a lot of time doing is just taking care of myself, and I just gave myself a pedicure right before I came online. And I started walking and exercising, and so really life is good. I was one of these retired people that had a calendar that was solid, and lots of times I might have done one or two things in one day. And now that calendar, I look at and there's nothing on it. And that's not all bad. And so that's what I would have to say.
Well, I guess my turn. Candy, I actually gave myself a pedicure this morning.
All right.
I'm sure I was much less skilled than you. Well, I think what I would say would be I've actually enjoyed so much working from home and wish I could just continue to do it perpetually uh, because it's not only kept me from having to do the 70-mile commute
Right.
two ways, every day, but it's given me a great deal more time to spend around my wife and to get closer and to just increase the level of connection that we have,
Right. Yeah.
and then also to be around the house and be able to uh, spend a little more time with some projects in the yard
Mhm.
that commute time really robs you of.
Oh, yes. Boy.
So uh, that's probably been one of the biggest advantages that I've found to this time. And I'll be sad, I think, when the time comes, I don't know, sometime probably next year uh, when I'll have to go back to on-site working, if in fact that
Right.
happens.
Right. Well, I hope you get to stay home. That drive would be awful.
It
Me
is.
too, Candy. Me too. But again, it is important that we have this coping time. And I remember how, Candy, you said, and it was very encouraging. It was fun. Let's continue. So we will continue, and you see that we are professing our skills, and it's becoming more and more interesting. And we will have more and more guests.
Mhm.
And Candy and I are working on very, very different themes every week. And so we will have amazing guests. And I really appreciate again Pasha Burmenka, my son, for being with us today.
Yes.
And we will have more people like this who project this positive attitude toward the reality of life, because life does not end. And I think what we do every Saturday is we give this hope to people that even in the midst of anxiety and pain and trials and diseases, there is hope. And there is also the time that will never happen again. We have to live and we have to be joyful. And the more positive we are and the more skills to cope we have, we can handle this time. And then we will look back at this time and say, it changed us. This time had changed everybody. And our children will grow in a different time and they will never be as us, and as any generation is never the same as their parents. So thank you so much, Candy.
Yes.
And
Thank
thank you so
you.
much for this time. And again, thank you, Pasha. And I encourage our viewers today to send us questions and also your experience. What is that positive experience that you have that you will, looking back, remember? And maybe new skills, new hobbies. Maybe you painted new art. Maybe you composed a new song.
Hmm.
Send it to us. Send anything that you are so proud of. Maybe new recipes, new pictures of what you created, and we will post it here. And we will invite you to be our guests. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend, and be healthy. Remember, wear the mask, wash your hands, and protect others also, not only yourself.
That's right.
Be well. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you.